You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight, you will hear them. Grayness clung to the afternoon I found the chalet, a day surrendered to the pursuit of quietude, of splendid isolation. My imagination had sketched scenes of hearthside warmth, coffee steaming, the wind's muted percussion against timber walls. Never had I conjured this cage. Never this fear coiled tight in my chest, this dread of succumbing to sleep beneath its steep pitched roof. Now, time stretches thin. I measure the hours until escape, my gaze flicking perpetually rearward with every step beyond the threshold. The ascent had been a protracted unwinding, the mountain road a narrow ribbon threading between sentinel pines, the sky a vast, indifferent slate. Occasional glints of ice on the asphalt were stark warnings against haste, though hurry was furthest from my mind. I reached the cabin just as the sun bled away behind dense cloud cover. Snow lay thick and undisturbed upon the drive. Parking beside the porch, I began the transfer of my belongings. The chalet itself was clad in dark wood, its roof aggressively sloped, eaves heavy with accumulated snow. An intriguing silhouette at first blush. The porch, modest, held two stark metal chairs and a matching table. My suitcase bumped against the frame as I turned the key. The door groaned its reluctance. Inside, the air was heavy with antiquity. The scent of long-dried wood mingled with something stale, uncirculated. A wall switch coaxed a single, anemic bulb overhead into flickering existence. Closing the door sealed me within the stillness. The main room offered Spartan comfort. A couch, a low table, a television perched on a simple stand. Walls of rough-hewn logs gave the space a rustic texture. The fireplace occupied one corner, its hearth tools leaning like iron sentinels against the brick. A short corridor branched right to a compact kitchen, terminating ahead at a solitary bedroom. Cozy, perhaps, yet marred by a chilling peculiarity. Every window was fortified from within by thick iron bars, clamped shut with padlocks and chains. And the crucifixes, startlingly numerous, one affixed high in each corner of the living room ceiling, another presiding over the entryway. Not dusty relics, but polished, as if tended with unsettling diligence. I dropped my suitcase onto the couch, drawn immediately to the nearest window. The bars were cold, immovable beneath my testing grip, the chains rattling faintly, the locks formidable. A tension seized my shoulders. This wasn't listed in the amenities for a holiday rental. My thoughts scrambled for explanations. Protection against bears, perhaps. A history of break-ins. Yet the pervasive iconography felt different, suggesting a defense against something far less tangible than wildlife or petty thieves. An owner's eccentricity, I told myself, attempting to dismiss the prickle of unease. The bedroom proved small, functional, a single bed pushed against the far wall, a nightstand bearing a dusty lamp. Its lone window, too, was barred. Hooks dotted the walls, presumably for coats. Another crucifix clung near the ceiling. Leaving my bag, I stepped back outside, needing air before darkness fully descended. The porch steps uttered small complaints beneath my boots. The sky deepened, the sun a pale rumor behind the clouds. Around the chalet, The forest pressed close, dense with pines and sculpted snowdrifts, offering an initial deceptive calm. I drew the frigid air deep, a sting in my lungs. My boots plunged into the snow as I made a brief circuit of the structure. No other cabins nearby, no tracks but my own. Utterly deserted. Wind stirred the high branches, eliciting distant groans as trees rubbed against each other. 10 minutes surveying the property, then back inside to wrestle with the fireplace. Later, instant noodles constituted dinner, eaten standing at the kitchen counter. The silence was profound, broken only by the refrigerator's low hum and the sporadic crackle and pop from the living room hearth. The television yielded only a blizzard of static. I silenced it. Loneliness brushed against me, but this was the intended cure. Distance from the clamor, space to recalibrate. Still, the image of bars and crosses lingered, an insistent, discordant note. Sleep beckoned around 11. Outside, the wind had gathered force, gusting and whistling against the roofline. A distinct chill permeated the bedroom, prompting me to keep my sweater layered over my thermal shirt. The bed frame protested as I lay down. Extinguishing the lamp, I courted oblivion, listening to the wind's symphony. Just as consciousness began to fray, a sound intruded. Not the wind, I realized, but something finer, more insidious. Faint whispers. I held my breath, straining. They came in flurries like multiple hushed voices overlapping, unintelligible but undeniably present, seemingly emanating from the hallway just beyond the door. My heart accelerated. Sitting bolt upright, I focused, ears straining against the dark. The whispers persisted, then unmistakable, soft as exhaled breath. My name. Adrenaline surged. I slapped the nightstand, fumbling for the lamp switch. Light flooded the small room. The whispers ceased instantly. Silence slammed back. Absolute. My pulse hammered against my eardrums. A minute passed. Then cautiously, I rose, crept to the bedroom door, eased it open. The living room lay submerged in shadow. The fireplace embers reduced to cold ash. Nothing stirred. I retreated, shutting the door, the click of the lock echoing my own jangled nerves. Back in bed, the lamp remained defiantly lit. Sleep became a shallow, hunted thing, my body rigid, anticipating a touch, startled awake by every creak and sigh of the old structure. Around 5, needing to escape the oppressive interior, I pulled on boots, planning a brief foray into the pre-dawn chill. Opening the front door, I stopped dead. Footprints marred the pristine snow encircling the porch. Ordinary boot prints, seemingly, yet their pattern was bizarre, weaving, zigzagging close to the chalet walls, originating inexplicably at one corner and vanishing abruptly near the back, as if their maker had simply dissolved into the frigid air. A nauseating coldness bloomed in my gut, sweat prickling my forehead. I followed the trail a short distance. It just ended. The surrounding snow remained untouched. Retreating inside, I bolted the door, my gaze darting to the windows, verifying the integrity of locks and chains. Nothing appeared disturbed. I stared at the cold iron, the heavy links, the whispers, the footprints. My hands trembled faintly. Coffee became a necessary ritual, an anchor to rationality. Perhaps a local wandered by. Perhaps somehow I'd made them myself in my brief circuit the previous evening. But the prints were not my size, and their number, their erratic path. A leaden weight settled in my chest. The day became an exercise in forced occupation. I located a key on the kitchen counter for a small, locked shed beside the chalet. Inside, neatly stacked logs and a small axe resided amid the scent of damp wood. I hauled armfuls inside, preparing for the night, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line, searching for movement, for the glint of observation. Nothing. A weak sun filtered through the clouds, casting a softer luminescence on the snow. The air felt marginally less biting, though my coat remained zipped tight. My phone offered only the barest flicker of signal, enough to dispatch a terse message confirming my arrival, omitting any mention of the strangeness. Paranoia felt like the indulgence I couldn't afford to broadcast. By noon, the walls felt closer. I ventured into the woods, hoping for better reception, or at least distraction. Snow crunched rhythmically underfoot. The trees stood in silent congregation, the stillness occasionally broken by the flap of unseen wings. Half a mile out, unease turned me back. The wind was rising again, carrying the threat of disorientation. The return journey was haunted by the image of those phantom footprints. I scanned the ground obsessively. Only my own tracks marred the snow. Back at the chalet, another circuit revealed the chilling truth. Fresh prints near the rear wall. Same size, same erratic pattern, same abrupt termination. No ingress, no egress, just presence. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fled back inside, slamming the door, catching my reflection in the small entryway mirror, sweat sheening my temples, eyes bloodshot with fatigue and fear. The remainder of the afternoon dissolved into restless pacing. The television remained a screen of furious static. A small stereo in the kitchen yielded only a faint, crackling country station, songs fading in and out until I surrendered to the silence once more. I forced down a sandwich, drank icy water directly from the tap, the pipes groaning in protest. As evening bled the color from the sky, returning it to that familiar, oppressive gray, the wind began its mournful circling of the cabin. I built the fire early, feeding it generously. Its crackling dance offered little comfort. My gaze kept returning to the crucifixes, the bars, the locks. Were they meant to keep something out? Or a thought that now looped relentlessly, to keep something in? That night, the whispers commenced almost as soon as the main lights were extinguished. I sat near the hearth, seeking solace in the firelight. A soft, sibilant voice materialized near my ear. I flinched violently, whirling around. Empty air. Then, a chorus rose. Multiple voices, layered, indistinct, seeming to emanate from every shadowed corner of the room. Low, uneven cadences. And again, my name, clearer this time, breathed in a distinctly masculine tone. Panic seized me. I scrambled to my feet, snatching the iron poker from its stand, backing away until my shoulders met the rough log wall. The disembodied conversation persisted for several agonizing minutes. The poker felt heavy, slippery in my trembling grasp. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. My breathing hitched, shallow and rapid. Then, as if a dial were being slowly turned, the voices attenuated, fading into the background hum of the wind and fire. Only the crackling flames remained, casting jittery shadows. Adrenaline left me wired, shaky. I forced myself to breathe, slow and deep. Poker still clutched tight. I retreated to the bedroom, locked the door, and wedged a chair beneath the handle for good measure. The lamp stayed on. Sleep seemed a ludicrous proposition, Yet exhaustion eventually claimed me. I surfaced abruptly, wrenched from shallow unconsciousness by a faint rapping sound on the bedroom window. My eyes snapped open. Darkness still reigned outside. I stared at the barred window, nothing visible through the iron grid, but the sound repeated, a distinct tap-tap, like a fingernail flicking against the cold glass. Heart pounding anew, I sat up. The tapping persisted, rhythmic, deliberate, then ceased. Holding the poker like a talisman, I crept towards the window, peering out past the bars. Only impenetrable blackness met my gaze. The wind howled its lonely song. The glass remained clear, unmarred. I stood there a long while, muscles coiled, waiting. Eventually, I returned to the bed, but didn't lie down. Simply sat, rigid, eyes fixed on the window, until the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the bars. Morning light revealed the final insult. More footprints. Everywhere. Circling the entire chalet, looping strangely, pausing beneath each barred window. A visceral shudder coursed through me. Enough. My reserves were depleted, nerves frayed raw. My face felt tight, chapped by cold and sleeplessness. I would not endure another night. Belongings were thrown haphazardly into my suitcase, clothes unfolded. I kicked the front door open, dragging the bag onto the porch. The slap of cold air was almost welcome, a sharp dose of reality. The car was loaded in a frenzy, a final check for wallet and keys before twisting the ignition. One last look back at the chalet. The crucifixes held their positions. The window bars glinted dully in the nascent light. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw movement behind the front window, a shadow briefly occluding the dim interior, but I refused the impulse to verify. Inside the car, I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I turned the key. The engine coughed, then caught, the heater beginning its low thrum. Tires crunched over the snow as I reversed, swinging onto the narrow track. A glance in the rearview mirror showed the chalet diminishing, receding into the pines. That fleeting impression of movement lingered. I pressed down on the accelerator, pulse still erratic. The road snaked down the mountainside. I focused intently on navigating the icy patches, the scenery now irrelevant. Escape was the only imperative. Reach the main road, descend from this haunted altitude. The whispers were gone, yet a peculiar pressure remained in my ears, as if the silence itself had gained density. My throat felt constricted. My grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled, shoulders aching with residual tension. Miles later, the first outpost of normalcy appeared, a small, brightly lit gas station. I pulled in, cut the engine, and simply sat for a moment, the idling motor a comforting sound. Safety, or the illusion of it, began to seep back in. The fluorescent lights felt harsh, clinical. Only then did the depth of my exhaustion truly register, a profound weariness settling into my bones. My face felt numb, hands tingling. What resided in that chalet, I cannot say. I know only that it noticed me. It paced the snow around my sanctuary, breathed my name in the darkness, tapped for attention at my window. It watched, unseen, and I fled before it could attempt a more intimate introduction. That particular slope of the mountain is territory I will cede willingly. I drove away with a frantic heart and a persistent, backward glance that hasn't left me yet. The city core beckoned, promising liberation from the tyranny of the commute. So I took this compact flat, nestled among the concrete arteries. Sleep, however, became an unexpected casualty. Proximity to work, envisioned as a life simplified, instead unraveled the threads of my composure. A few nights of settling dust, arranging meager possessions, whispering affirmations of a streamlined future. Then, the fourth night shattered the calm. A klaxon shriek erupted from the corridor around 2:30, a raw, metallic tearing through the pre-dawn stillness. Heart hammering against ribs, propelled by primal instinct, I stumbled towards the door, mind fogged with sleep's residue. Yanking it open revealed nothing. No acrid sting of smoke, no lick of flame, just the relentless assault of the alarm, reverberating off aged plaster. After minutes that felt like hours, it choked into silence on its own. Morning found me tracking down the building's custodian, Mr. Thorne, they called him. A man whose title suggested stewardship, but whose demeanor radiated indifference. "What was that inferno last night?" I asked. A shrug, a sigh. "Old system. Wiring's probably shot." He mumbled assurances of an electrician. Trusting him was my inaugural folly. The following night, punctual as a phantom train, the scream returned. Same ungodly hour, same void of smoke or fire. I stood shivering in the hallway's dim light, clad only in sleepwear, a solitary island of bewildered frustration. Silence were behind the other doors. Peculiar. Surely such a din would rouse the dead. A tentative knock on my immediate neighbor's door yielded only a sliver of face, belonging to a man named Silas. "Didn't hear a thing," he rasped, before the door clicked shut, a final punctuation of dismissal. This edifice is a relic. Thick-set concrete sinews, heavy iron-framed windows that gaze out like vacant eyes. A persistent coolness clings to the passageways, a subterranean chill defying the season. Sound seems swallowed by the dense construction, muffled, inert, except for that nocturnal siren. When it wails, the vibration resonates deep in my sternum, a physical impossibility to disregard. Yet my neighbors drift through their days, offering placid deflections. Heavy sleeper, or earplugs, you know. Their sincerity felt thin, brittle. By week's end, the alarm was a nightly ritual, carving its presence into the fragile hours between 2 and 3. My eyes burned, webbed with red veins from sleep's constant interruption. Sleeping aids were futile. The sound pierced through the chemical haze. Another appeal to Thorne brought the same languid shrug. Faulty sensor, likely. Always the faulty sensor. Always the phantom electrician. Night 6 etched itself differently. The familiar klaxon jolted me awake, but this time, a clammy dread accompanied the adrenaline surge. Sweat beaded on my brow, my t-shirt clinging damply. Hesitation gripped me at the door, a cold premonition coiling in my gut. Did I truly wish to confront whatever waited? My pulse thudded, a frantic drum against my eardrums. Steeling myself, I opened the door. A gossamer haze drifted near the ceiling, an ethereal mist shimmering faintly under the corridor lights, which seemed oddly subdued. No scent, no heat. And then, a shape. Down the hall, near the recessed fire extinguisher alcove, stood a figure. A stark silhouette against the pale wall, utterly motionless, facing my way. Featureless, depthless. Instinct labeled it a neighbor, perhaps checking the equipment. But as I took a hesitant step forward, it dissolved. Not retreated, not faded, simply ceased to exist, as if my blinking had erased it. Heat prickled my neck, my stomach plummeted. I stood frozen, gulping air, scanning the empty passage. The mist, too, had vanished. Perhaps my eyes had adjusted. The alarm still shrieked, then abruptly died, plunging the corridor into a silence more unnerving than the noise. My footsteps echoed as I approached the extinguisher. Cold, smooth metal. No sign of disturbance. A tremor traced my spine. Back in my flat, the deadbolt slid home. The chain rattled into place. I wedged a small table against the door, the gesture feeling absurdly futile. Sleep remained elusive. The next day, a small security camera found its perch outside my door, a silent sentinel aimed at capturing proof for Thorn. Simple memory card, continuous recording. A lunchtime test confirmed its vigilance. The hallway rendered perfectly. But that night, post-alarm, disorientation delayed my review until morning. Eager anticipation curdled into disbelief. The crucial time segment, gone. Not corrupted, just absent. The recording leaped from 1:59 a.m. straight to 3:01 a.m. A clean excision. My skin crawled. I understood the device. It wasn't motion activated. It should have captured everything. The alarm's fury, my emergence, the empty, or not empty, corridor. Instead, a void. Armed with this digital ghost, I confronted Thorn once more, showed him the gap. He merely shook his head. Card must be faulty. Then the familiar refrain, wiring issue. When pressed about the lack of widespread complaint, he waved a dismissive hand. Oh, a few mention it now and then. Nothing major. Nothing major. A nightly siren disrupting sleep felt decidedly major. His apathy was a wall. I mentioned the silhouette, asked about the building's own surveillance. Hallway cameras, not fully operational yet. Installation issues. The excuse felt flimsy, transparent. Over subsequent days, I initiated conversations with other residents, faces glimpsed in passing. A woman on the third floor admitted hearing it once or twice, but not nightly. A young man claimed utter ignorance. Another insisted the building lacked corridor alarms entirely. Had they seen mist? Haze? Blank stares met my inquiries, followed by averted gazes or hasty retreats. The implication hung heavy. I was the problem. My door became a fortress. Double locks engaged nightly. A second chain added. A chair jammed beneath the knob. A primitive bulwark against... what? My body betrayed me. Each alarm triggered an autonomic storm. Waking drenched in sweat, hands trembling, throat parched. A state of perpetual alert. I'd fling myself from bed, check the peephole, sometimes crack the door. Occasionally, the faint mist reappeared, swirling distantly. Twice more, I glimpsed that fleeting shape, near the glowing exit sign, by the extinguisher again, vanishing the instant my gaze tried to fix it. Relocating my sleep to the living room offered no respite. The sound permeated the walls regardless. One night, I resolved to stay put, to ride it out behind the locked door. Lying rigid, staring at the textured ceiling, I waited. 5 minutes of auditory torture, then abrupt silence, followed by a faint rustling, soft scuffling just outside my door. Heart lodged in my throat, I crept closer, pressing my ear to the cool wood. Not words, but perhaps breathing. A shallow, sibilant whisper, then stillness. I confessed all this to Leo, my colleague. Stress-induced hallucinations, he suggested gently. He agreed to stay over, a witness dispatched to the front lines of my nightly siege. At 2:10, punctual as ever, the alarm erupted. Leo vaulted off the sofa, eyes wide with shock. What in God's name? We reached the door simultaneously. I pulled it open. Empty corridor, normal lighting. The alarm screamed for maybe 30 seconds, then ceased. Leo looked at me, a flicker of confusion, then a shrug. No smoke, no fire, he confirmed. We stepped out. The air felt cold, nothing more. No mist, no silhouette. He lingered another couple of hours before murmuring about an early meeting and departing. The alarm was weird, he conceded, but its failure to repeat during his extended presence left him unconvinced. Another night, I staged my own vigil. Folding chair, thermos of bitter coffee, positioned near the elevators. From 1:45 until nearly 3 a.m., I sat, hyper-alert, listening to the building's nocturnal sighs, the hum of lights, the gurgle of water through hidden pipes. Silence reigned. Defeated, I retreated to my apartment. The instant the door clicked shut behind me, the alarm commenced its shriek. It felt deliberate, taunting. Rushing back out revealed only the familiar emptiness, the sound echoing madly before cutting off. My next attempt to engage Thorne was met with preemptive dismissal. Look, he interrupted. We replaced the sensor on your floor. If you're still hearing it, must be another level. Check them all, I pleaded, an eye roll. I'll look into it. A promise as hollow as the corridor felt at 3 a.m. My phone became my next recorder, placed near the door each night, capturing ambient sound. Sometimes success, a clear digital imprint of the alarm's blast. Other nights, another anomaly. The audio file showed a clean break, a silent chasm precisely during the alarm's typical duration. Battery full, storage ample. It defied logic. Calling the fire department crossed my mind, a desperate measure. But the prospect of neighborly scorn, of being branded the hysterical newcomer, stayed my hand. What if it was just a glitch? The hassle, the embarrassment. Sleep dwindled to ragged fragments. Bedtime became synonymous with anticipatory dread. Every floorboard creak, every distant siren sent jolts through my system. The tension built hours before the appointed time. Tightening chest, clammy palms, a sheen of sweat. The absurdity of my fear warred with its visceral reality. Drifting off peacefully felt like a forgotten luxury. One midnight, a distinct noise, metal grating against metal, just outside my door. Through the peephole, only a distorted slice of dim hallway, the overhead light flickering erratically, breath held, listening intently. Silence returned, heart pounding, legs unsteady. I opened the door. Empty. The fire extinguisher alcove, undisturbed. Back inside, locks secured, table wedged. The ritual felt less ridiculous each time. A final attempt with the man at the hall's end. Had he seen anything near the extinguisher? He regarded me as if I'd sprouted horns. No idea what you're on about. Never seen anything odd. The alarm? A head shake. Sleep like the dead. He muttered an excuse about work and hurried away. A month now, entombed in this place. The alarm persists, a spectral tenant, 4 nights a week or more, faithful to its 2 to 3 a.m. window. Sometimes the mist drifts, sometimes not. Sometimes the silhouette flickers at the edge of vision. I've abandoned questioning the neighbors. Their feigned ignorance is a wall I cannot breach. Thorn avoids my gaze. Furniture rearranged. Acoustic experiments failed. The camera remains stubbornly blind during the crucial moments, its memory mysteriously wiped. My door bears 2 locks. A third feels imminent. When the siren wails, I jolt upright, slick with sweat, pulse frantic. I stand a sentinel by the door, forehead pressed against the wood, straining to hear footsteps in the ensuing silence. Entering the corridor now feels like tempting fate, inviting a glimpse of something indigestible. So I wait for the cessation, then crawl back to bed, staring at the ceiling, sheets damp, head throbbing, wondering about the colossal error of this move. Breaking the lease whispers seductively, yet the proximity to work, the daunting prospect of another upheaval, holds me captive. This existence, nightly jolts, phantom sounds, ambiguous visions, is unsustainable. Exhaustion frays my nerves. My hands tremble unlocking the door each morning. What haunts these halls? A malicious prank, faulty wires, or something else woven into the fabric of this old building? All I know is the certainty of the alarm's return, and when it comes, the familiar cascade. Hammering pulse, cold sweat, racing thoughts. I'll stand by my door, locked tight, wondering if the silhouette watches from the haze, utterly alone in this waking nightmare, praying for a dawn that brings silence. The inaugural postcard manifested on a Tuesday. Innocuous, or so Elias Thorne presumed, till the chilling realization dawned. Its sender possessed intimacies no stranger should hold, fragments of his existence utterly unavailable to the outside world. That day remains etched sharp in memory, a brittle cusp of autumn, the kind of morning air that lent profound gratitude to the steaming ceramic mug cradled in his hands. He'd been sifting through the day's mail at the kitchen table, dispatching bills and circulars to their respective piles, when it surfaced. An unassuming postcard, utterly plain, depicting some generic alpine vista he couldn't place. He almost consigned it to the recycling bin with the rest of the detritus, but an inexplicable urge stayed his hand, compelling him to turn it over. There, inscribed in a precise, unfamiliar script, was the message. Hope the dawn run was invigorating. The crimson footwear becomes you. Elias stilled, coffee cup arrested mid-journey to his lips. He had indeed pounded the pavement that very morning, shod in his preferred crimson trainers. Yet, how could the sender know? The postmark, smudged but legible, originated from a city 3 states distant, stamped nearly a week prior. He rationalized it as coincidence, albeit a profoundly disquieting one. Perhaps a misdelivery, meant for another soul entirely. The postcard vanished into a drawer, a deliberate act of dismissal, yet an intractable unease took root within him. Through the remainder of the day, his gaze flickered reflexively over his shoulder. Faces in passing crowds were scrutinized, searched for any sign of overt observation. Absurd, he admonished himself. Mere phantoms conjured by a stray piece of mail. A week dissolved, and Elias had nearly persuaded himself of the incident's insignificance. Then arrived the second postcard, This one showcased a picturesque cafe, utterly foreign to him. With fingers that betrayed a tremor, he flipped it, his pulse accelerating as he absorbed the words. Your presentation resonated today. Azure truly is your hue. A visceral chill permeated him. He had delivered a pivotal presentation at his firm that morning, precisely while wearing his favored azure tie. Coincidence strained credulity past its breaking point. He examined the card minutely, hunting for any fissure, any clue to the sender's identity. The postmark hailed from yet another city, again days old. How could they possess knowledge of events that lay unborn when the card was mailed? In the ensuing weeks, the postcards became a rhythm, a disturbing cadence to his life. Each bore a different idyllic scene: sun-drenched coasts, shadowed forests, bustling marketplaces, always locales he had never visited, and every message divulged some closely guarded detail of his present. The new haircut frames your face well. Suspect the dispute with your sister was taxing. Kin can be intricate. Mind that angle. Perhaps forego tomorrow's run. Each card a dispatch from a different city, invariably postmarked before the described event transpired. It was as though the sender perceived his future, privy to his every step before he took it. Elias became consumed. The postcards, a growing constellation of glossy landscapes and unsettling insights, were pinned to a corkboard in his study. He sought patterns, connections, any thread leading back to the invisible architect of his anxiety. He researched the depicted locations online. All anonymous tourist spots yielded nothing. He began deliberately disrupting his routines, embracing spontaneity, making erratic choices in a desperate bid to outwit his unseen observer. Yet the postcards persisted, unerringly prescient. A valiant attempt at a detour. The park possesses a certain charm this season, does it not? Sleep became a fugitive state. Leaving his apartment felt like shedding armor, rendering him laid bare, vulnerable. Every stranger became a potential suspect, the barista crafting his morning brew, the quiet neighbor down the hall, some forgotten acquaintance nursing a spectral grievance. He sought assistance from the constabulary, but their hands were tied. Absent explicit threats, their power was circumscribed. They suggested altering his mailing address, yet a deep certainty resonated within him. Such measures would prove futile. The postcards would find their mark regardless. Driven to desperation, he engaged a private investigator, a Ms. Anya Sharma. Initially, her skepticism was palpable, a professional veneer over disbelief. But as the postcards continued their relentless arrival, each predicting events with uncanny temporal dissonance, even her composure frayed. I've encountered nothing remotely like this, she conceded, her gaze sweeping over the collection arrayed across her desk. It's anticipatory surveillance. It defies logic. They exhausted possibilities. Surveillance cameras cocooning his residence, mail screening protocols, even a temporary relocation to stay with friends several states away. Yet, irrespective of distance or precaution, the postcards materialized. The messages sharpened, growing more invasive, more unsettlingly familiar. You truly ought to ring your mother more frequently. She pines for your voice. That inflammation appears bothersome. Perhaps tea tree oil would offer relief. I perceive your fear. You are right to feel it. That final sentiment shattered his remaining composure. He ceased attending work, severed ties with friends. He retreated into his apartment, a self-imposed exile behind drawn curtains, startled by every creak and groan of the building. The postcards, however, adapted, now slipped silently beneath his door instead of arriving via the post. "You cannot hide indefinitely," one declared. "I will invariably find you." He existed as a captive within his own walls, harrowed by missives from a ubiquitous, omniscient pursuer. How could one possibly contend with an adversary perpetually 10 steps ahead? Months bled together. His career evaporated, connections to loved ones withered. His entire universe contracted to the fraught space between his front door and the floor beneath it, where each new postcard was retrieved with violently trembling hands. Then, on a Wednesday draped in gray, the pattern fractured. Opening his door, Elias found not a postcard, but a letter. A tangible letter nested in a crisp white envelope, his name penned in that chillingly familiar script. For a protracted moment, he simply stared, paralyzed by the anticipation of its contents. What fresh torment awaited within? Ultimately, curiosity, sharp and insistent, eclipsed his dread. Inside lay a single sheet of paper. As he unfolded it, something small and metallic tumbled out. A diminutive key. He retrieved it, turning its cool weight in his palm as his eyes devoured the text. By this juncture, questions must abound. Answers await. This key unlocks Locker 3B at the Central train station. Be there at midnight. Attend alone, or forfeit the truth forever. He must have reread the words 100 times, his thoughts a vertiginous whirl. This was it. The precipice, the chance to confront his tormentor, to finally grasp the why underpinning this psychological siege. Yet, could it be trusted? A snare. In the end, the gnawing hunger for answers proved stronger than the instinct for self-preservation. As the witching hour approached, he found himself navigating the cavernous, deserted train station, the small key clutched tight. Locker 3B was easily located. His fingers shook as he inserted the key, half bracing for detonation, for some calamitous denouement. But the lock yielded with a quiet click, revealing only a small, leather-bound journal nestled within. He opened it. The world tilted, reality warping around him. The handwriting mirrored the postcards flawlessly. Yet this was no stranger's diary. It was his own. Page after page documented his thoughts, his experiences, events yet to unfold. The final entry bore a date 5 years hence. It chronicled in stark detail his discovery of temporal displacement, his subsequent attempts to communicate with his past self via postcards, a misguided effort to brace himself for imminent upheaval. His mind spun, grappling with the impossible paradox that suddenly illuminated everything. The postmarks predating events, the impossible intimacy of the knowledge. He had been stalking himself. As he stood there, journal pressed against his chest like a shield, a figure coalesced from the station's deep shadows. He recognized the silhouette before it stepped fully into the weak lamplight. It was him, older, etched with fatigue, yet undeniably Elias Thorne. "Forgive me," his future counterpart murmured, the voice thick with regret. "My intent was preparation, guidance. I perceive now only the pain inflicted." Why? The single word scraped past Elias's constricted throat. Why orchestrate this? I exhaled profoundly. To avert a catastrophe, one that irrevocably altered our world. But I grasped too late that tampering with the past risked forging the very future I sought to prevent. They spoke for hours in the echoing emptiness of the station. I recounted the years ahead, spoke of breakthroughs and profound losses, of a world teetering on the brink. What becomes of us now? Elias asked as the first suggestion of dawn stained the high windows. Now, the future Elias replied, we permit events to unfurl naturally. No further postcards, no more interference. Que sera, sera. And with that, the figure dissolved back into the retreating darkness, leaving Elias alone with a journal, and a mind brimming with impossible, burdensome knowledge. To claim life reverted to normalcy thereafter would be a falsehood. How could it? He had glimpsed a potential future, conversed with a self he desperately hoped never to embody. The postcards ceased, true to the promise, but the experience left an ineradicable imprint. He moves through life now with a heightened, almost painful awareness of choice. Each decision weighed against the spectral possibility of that haunted future self. At times, the urge to incinerate the journal, to obliterate the foreknowledge and reclaim ignorance, is potent. Yet he cannot. It remains a tangible reminder of time's delicate tapestry, the profound gravity of individual action, and the inherent peril of attempting to outmaneuver destiny. And occasionally, passing a display of postcards, a familiar chill traces its path down his spine. He cannot help but wonder, is this how it commences? It began with a faint insistence, a dry friction within the walls, surfacing first on a Tuesday night. Initially, Eliza dismissed it, the groans of antiquity perhaps, the settling sighs of the venerable Victorian she called home. But the sound, a persistent rasp, swelled beyond the protests of old timber and plumbing, hardening into the chilling certainty that something nested within the plaster labyrinth, alive and clawing for egress. That evening remains etched in her memory, sharp and cold. Late autumn had draped the world in bruised twilight, and a tempest gathered, its breath rattling the tall, mullioned windows. Eliza had always cherished the house's eccentricities, the floorboards that sang underfoot, the elaborate cornices like frozen lace. Yet tonight, shadows pooled with unnerving depth, each familiar creak a sharp intake of breath. She was ensconced on the velvet chaise, seeking refuge in the printed word, when the first intimation reached her, a delicate scritch-scratch, almost lost beneath the wind's orchestral fury. Lowering her novel, she tilted her head, straining. It came again, a methodical worrying sound emanating from the damask-papered wall just behind her shoulder. Mice, her practical mind supplied. The old edifice had played host before. She resolved to acquire traps come morning, attempting to recapture the narrative thread of her book. But the scratching intensified, shedding its subtlety for a frantic urgency. Setting the novel aside, Eliza rose and approached the wall, pressing her ear to the faded floral pattern. The sound gained clarity, a rhythmic abrasion, punctuated by something akin to tapping. A tremor, cold and electric, traced her spine. This was no mere rodent. Retreating, her thoughts scattered like startled birds. A raccoon? A squirrel? Somehow immured. Yet an intuition, deep and disquieting, refuted these explanations. The sounds possessed a disturbing deliberation, a purposefulness that chilled her. The remainder of the night dissolved into a restless pilgrimage through the shadowed rooms, Eliza tracking the migratory sounds. Each time she felt she'd cornered the source, it would dissolve and reappear elsewhere, a phantom presence always just beyond reach. Dawn found her hollow-eyed and frayed, adrift on caffeine and sleeplessness. Daylight brought a fragile rationality. Surely it was stress, she reasoned, an overstimulated imagination fed by too many gothic tales consumed late at night. She forced herself through the motions of the day, burying the unsettling memory beneath mundane tasks. But as dusk bled into the sky, the scratching resumed, this time originating from the kitchen. Eliza stood at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water, when she heard it. A faint scrabbling near the hulking refrigerator. She froze, suds clinging to her wrists, ears straining. There was no denying it now. Something moved within the very bones of her house. She telephoned Leo, carefully modulating her voice to mask the burgeoning panic as she recounted the persistent sounds. He proposed rats, offering to visit the following day, tools in hand. Eliza accepted, grateful as much for the impending company as the practical assistance. That night proved worse than the first. The scratching achieved a new stridency, a relentless accompaniment to her fear. It seemed to track her movements, a close, unseen companion. Once, she thought she detected a faint susurrus beneath the scraping, a thread of voice, but dismissed it as the wind's deceit. Sleep was impossible. She huddled on the chaise, bathing the room in electric light, startling at every sigh of the old structure. Morning arrived, finding Eliza brittle and exhausted. Leo appeared mid-morning, exuding a reassuring competence, tool belt slung low, a confidence that visibly faltered the moment he crossed the threshold. The air in here feels off, he remarked, brow furrowed, like it's heavy somehow. They dedicated hours to the search, peeling back carpets, scrutinizing vents, even excising small exploratory squares from the drywall, where the sounds had been most pronounced. Their efforts yielded nothing. No droppings, no nests, no tangible evidence of intrusion. Maybe just the pipes acting up after all, Leo suggested, packing his implements, though a flicker of doubt lingered in his gaze. He, too, had heard it late that afternoon, a distinct, undeniable scratching from within an upstairs wall. They'd scrambled towards the sound, only for it to cease abruptly and seemingly migrate across the ceiling joists into an adjacent partition. His departure left the house feeling cavernous, amplifying Eliza's isolation. Almost immediately, the scratching recommenced, as if its source had merely waited for her solitude. That night marked a significant escalation. The scraping became a near constant, maddening rhythm against her taut nerves. More disturbing were the novel sounds, soft, weighty thuds from within the walls, and what she could no longer rationalize away as whispers. She couldn't discern words, yet the cadence was unmistakably linguistic. Sometimes a solitary murmur, other times a hushed colloquy, hovering just beyond comprehension. She contacted the authorities, her voice trembling despite her efforts at composure. A uniformed officer arrived, a woman with kind eyes, who patiently walked the house with Eliza. Predictably, the moment she entered, silence fell. The officer expressed sympathy, but lacking any proof of disturbance, could offer little tangible aid. The subsequent days blurred into a cycle of sleepless nights and hypervigilant days. Eliza took leave from work, her focus consumed entirely by the ceaseless, insidious sounds. She consulted a parade of experts, exterminators, structural engineers, even a local collective specializing in paranormal phenomena. None unearthed a concrete explanation, though several departed with visibly unsettled expressions. The scratching persisted, amplifying in volume and frequency. The whispers gained a chilling clarity, though their meaning remained elusive, like listening to a half-remembered language just outside one's grasp. Roughly a week after the onset, the phenomenon shifted once more. Eliza stood in the bathroom, splashing cool water onto her face, seeking a moment's reprieve, when she heard it. A sharp, deliberate knock from within the tiled wall beside the basin. 3 distinct raps, demanding attention. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Tentatively, she pressed her ear to the cool tile. "Hello," she breathed, the word feeling both ludicrous and terrifying. "Is anyone there?" The reaction was instantaneous. More knocking, rapid and insistent, interwoven with frantic scratching and sounds that chillingly resembled muffled weeping. It was as though her acknowledgement had broken a dam, unleashing a desperate flood of communication from whatever entity resided within. Eliza stumbled backward, her reality fracturing. This was impossible. There couldn't be something, someone, alive, trapped within the structure of her home. Yet the noises surged, growing more desperate. She could distinguish sobbing now, punctuated by utterances in an unrecognizable tongue. Panic seized her. She fled the house, running blindly down the street until the porch light was a distant star. She stood there, lungs burning, gulping air, staring back at the familiar facade. From the outside, it appeared serene, immutable, but she knew. The house pulsed with an impossible presence, something desperate to be known. That night found her in the sterile anonymity of a motel room, the memory of those sounds echoing relentlessly in her mind. The following day, fortified by borrowed resolve and a neighbor's sledgehammer, Eliza returned. She stood in the hallway where the knocking had been clearest, the tool's weight a grim anchor in her trembling hands. "I'm gonna let you out," she announced to the silent wall, the words tasting absurd even as she spoke them. "Stay back." The scratching within erupted into a frenzy, accompanied by what sounded unnervingly like excited murmurs. Drawing a ragged breath, she swung the sledgehammer. Plaster disintegrated, ancient lath yielding to her desperate force. Again and again she struck, carving a ragged aperture into the wall. As the dust began to settle, thick and acrid, she peered into the breach, pulse frantic. Nothing. No trapped soul, no beast, not even a hidden cavity large enough to conceal anything substantial. Only insulation, wires, the mundane reality of the wall's inner structure, the back of the drywall from the adjoining room. She remained there, sledgehammer dangling forgotten from her grasp, surveying the wreckage. A profound silence had descended upon the house. no scratching, no whispers, no knocking. Only the ragged cadence of her own breathing filled the void. In the ensuing days, exhaustive inspections commenced. Walls were opened, floorboards lifted. Experts meticulously examined every inch, searching for hidden voids, forgotten passages, any anomaly that might explain her experiences. They found nothing. She couldn't remain. The house, once cherished, now felt irrevocably tainted. She sold it at a significant loss, dutifully disclosing the phenomena to the new inhabitants. They likely deemed her mad, she suspected, but they acquired a beautiful old home for a bargain. Eliza relocated across the country, choosing a modern apartment characterized by thin walls and the reassuring cacophony of urban life. Sometimes, late at night, habit compels her to press an ear against the drywall, listening. Mostly, she hears only the city's familiar hum. Yet, occasionally, in the fragile moments just before sleep claims her, a phantom resonance surfaces, the faintest, most familiar, scritch-scratch. And in that instant, she is transported back to the old Victorian on Willow Lane, forever wondering what secrets slumbered within its frame, and whether they had ever truly released their hold. Demolition is an act of revelation, but the secret Elias unearthed in his own hallway defied all architectural logic. Mid-swing, tearing down antiquated plaster, his crowbar struck not lath nor void, but a plane of unexpected smoothness concealed behind the crumbling drywall. As he peeled back the layers, anticipating forgotten wiring, or perhaps the ghost of a prior renovation, a window emerged instead. Framed in time-worn wood, its glass clouded with ossified dust, it materialized where no window had any right to be. A knot tightened in Elias's stomach. He knew the exterior facade on this side of the house presented an unbroken expanse of gray siding, flat and featureless. Yet here it was, an anomaly embedded in the mundane. Leaning closer, he swiped at the grime with his sleeve. A faint reflection shimmered back, then yielded to a nebulous glow emanating from beyond. Elias pressed his face nearer, expecting insulation, perhaps the dark cavity between studs. What greeted him was a room. His breath hitched. It resembled a Spartan bedroom, a narrow bed draped in a plain comforter, an adjacent table supporting an old-fashioned lamp, a low dresser pushed against the far wall, and the lamp was illuminated, casting a soft amber circle that barely kissed the bed's edge and the dresser's flank. No door was visible. No other furniture populated the confined space. A prickle of sweat traced a path down his neck. He tapped the glass. Cold, solid. Comprehension remained stubbornly out of reach. Retreating, Elias grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside, pacing the perimeter of his home. The section of wall corresponding to the window's impossible location was seamless siding, utterly devoid of any structural irregularity. Back inside, he consulted the brittle blueprints retrieved from a drawer. They depicted only the standard hallway configuration, offering no hint of an annexed room. No architectural footnote explaining this spatial paradox. A low hum resonated in his skull, a sensation akin to cognitive short-circuiting. The evidence of his senses warred with the impossibility of the thing itself. Sleep offered little respite that night. Each time Elias closed his eyes, the small room materialized behind his eyelids, the dim lamp sculpting shadows on unseen walls. He imagined the texture of the air within that space, the feel of the floor beneath phantom feet. A powerful urge arose, to rap sharply on the glass, to trace the frame seeking a hidden latch. Curiosity warred with a profound unease, a visceral understanding that finding furnished, lit rooms behind solid walls fell far outside the bounds of normal. Dawn broke, pale and uncertain, mirroring his own state. Driven by a restless need for answers, Elias returned to the hallway. With careful hammer blows, he cleared the remaining drywall, exposing the window's entire frame. His fingers explored its edges, solid, unyielding wood, aged and dense. No hinge, no lock, no seam on his side. The glass felt thick, impenetrable. He peered behind the frame, searching for any sign of artifice, a mere decorative illusion. It was no trick. Through the pane, the lamp's unwavering glow persisted. A cold, sinking sensation settled in his gut. He knocked, knuckles rapping against the cool surface. The lamp across the threshold flickered once, a brief electrical spasm, before resuming its steady vigil. No other response came. The ensuing days became a meticulous, frustrating hunt for a hidden ingress. Elias ransacked closets, navigated the dusty labyrinth of the attic, probing for trapdoors, concealed panels, any forgotten passage that might lead to the sequestered chamber. Nothing. The house guarded its anomaly jealously. During daylight hours, he found himself transfixed before the window, scrutinizing the scene beyond. The bed remained impeccably made. The lamp stood sentinel on its worn table. A few loose papers lay scattered atop the dresser. An aura of stillness pervaded the room, a fine layer of dust suggesting disuse. Yet the lamp burned eternally, defying explanation, untethered to any known circuit in his home. The notion of drilling through the exterior wall surfaced, only to be quelled by a quiet, insistent inner voice, warning him against it. The source of this apprehension remained obscure, but the thought alone provoked a visceral churn in his stomach. One evening, performing a final check before retiring, Elias approached the window. The hallway lights cast stark reflections, so he leaned in close, minimizing the glare. The lamp within glowed faithfully. Then, a flicker of movement near the dresser snagged his attention, perhaps merely his own mirrored motion, distorted. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass, straining to see. That's when a definite shape resolved itself from the gloom. It resembled a person, standing near the foot of the bed, leaning slightly forward. Elias froze, his heart initiating a frantic tattoo against his ribs. His muscles tensed, his breathing grew shallow, rapid. He squinted, trying to pierce the dimness. The figure seemed occupied, manipulating something on the bed. Then, with unnerving slowness, it began to turn towards the window. He recoiled instinctively, a jolt like ice water tracing his spine, the fine hairs on his arms erecting. His immediate thought, reflection, was quickly dismissed. The angle was wrong, the posture alien. The figure's head was cocked, tilted as if in appraisal, its gaze seemingly fixed upon him. "Hello," Elias whispered, his voice a fragile tremor in the quiet hall. Silence answered. The figure remained motionless, studying him. Adrenaline surged, a hot wave cresting in his chest. The impulse to flee warred with a paralyzing compulsion to observe. He noticed its eyes. They held a peculiar sheen, catching the lamp's light like polished obsidian, reflecting pinpricks back at him. something about that reflection felt nauseatingly familiar, almost like gazing into his own eyes, yet somehow inverted, wrong. The figure's features remained obscured, a silhouette limned by the lamp's glow, average height, nondescript build, yet imbued with an unsettling resonance. Elias backed away further. The figure didn't pursue, didn't react, simply stood its ground, watching. The following morning, Elias wrestled with the memory, attempting to rationalize it as a product of sleep deprivation and mounting stress. By daylight, the room beyond the glass appeared static and empty. The bed, the lamp, the dresser, all precisely as before. No trace of an occupant remained. He knocked again. The silence felt heavier this time. He forced himself through the motions of the day, running errands, trying to suppress the tendrils of anxiety coiling within him. Yet, intermittently, the image of the figure would flash in his mind's eye, accompanied by that familiar, sickening clench in his gut. That night, clad in a hoodie, Elias resolved to keep vigil. He positioned a chair in the hallway, switched off the overhead light, leaving only a small lamp burning at the far end to minimize reflections, while still allowing him to see. He sat, arms crossed, foot tapping a nervous rhythm, attuned to the house's nocturnal symphony, the wind rattling a loose gutter, the refrigerator's low hum. An hour passed. Restlessness gnawed at him. His eyelids grew heavy. Then, movement again. The same figure materialized at the edge of the bed's illumination. The lamp in its room pulsed once. A jolt shot through Elias. His legs twitched. Gripping the chair's arms, he rose slowly, deliberately. He crept closer to the window. The figure bent over the bed, gathering the scattered papers. When it straightened, facing him squarely, Elias felt his pulse hammering behind his ears. It lifted a hand, a gesture hovering between greeting and dismissal. Elias stared, his throat constricting. Hesitantly, his own hand rose, trembling. The figure tilted its head again, that peculiar, inquisitive angle. His focus locked onto those reflective eyes. They seemed to hold his own face captive within their dark, distorted depths. Without conscious thought, he mouthed the words, "Who are you?" His breath misted the glass momentarily. The figure pressed its palm flat against the air above the bed, and let the papers flutter down onto the comforter. It took a step closer, positioning itself near the dresser. Still, its face remained a canvas of shadows, though he could discern short hair and a build uncannily similar to his own. His heart pounded with such force his ribs ached. A sudden, overwhelming wave of panic broke over him. He stumbled backward, feet catching on the uneven floor where he'd removed boards earlier, nearly losing his balance. Glancing back, he saw the figure still standing rigidly by the bed. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of his neck, the unmistakable feeling of being observed by something fundamentally unnatural. He hurried to his bedroom, slammed the door, and twisted the lock. His heart raced. His palms were slick with cold sweat. Coherent thought fragmented, replaced by the echoing image of those eyes staring directly into his soul. Sleep was impossible. For several days, Elias actively avoided the hallway, attempting to impose a mental cordon around the unsettling discovery. He threw himself into other renovation tasks, painting living room walls, replacing a dining room light fixture. Yet each time he passed the hallway's threshold, an involuntary chill traversed his skin. His thoughts inevitably drifted back to the window, the room, the lamp, the figure, those mirror-like eyes. One evening, steeling himself, he ventured back. He flicked on the hallway light and stood before the window. The room beyond presented its familiar, static tableau. The soft lamplight, the smooth bedspread, the slightly disarrayed papers on the dresser. At first glance, it was empty. Bracing his hands on the sill, Elias leaned in, searching, hoping against hope for some mundane explanation to surface. Then, the lamp flickered. Anxiety spiked, sharp and cold. He held his breath, waiting. The silhouette reappeared, this time beside the dresser. A shadowy hand reached out, sliding the papers about as if searching. Elias decided to speak again, despite the previous silence. He forced steadiness into his voice. "I don't know what you want. I don't know how you got in there." His jaw clenched. A tremor ran through his arms. The figure offered no reply, continuing its silent manipulation of the papers. Then, its head swiveled towards him. Its eyes found his. Elias felt his heartbeat slam against his ribs like a trapped bird. His mouth went dry. His lips parted, but no further words came. Abruptly, the figure bent, selected one sheet of paper, and held it up before its shadowed face. It seemed an offering, an invitation to read, but distance and angle rendered the contents illegible. Elias's gaze darted across the glass, desperate for any discernible detail. The figure then folded the paper deliberately and tucked it into the bed's pillowcase. His scalp tingled. The action felt freighted with inexplicable significance, a clue just beyond his grasp. His mind raced, forming frantic, disjointed theories. The lamp flickered once more. In that brief interval of darkness, the figure vanished. When the light steadied, the room was empty again. He remained there panting, palms pressed flat against the cool wall. The air felt thick, charged. He realized he was drenched in sweat, the dampness clinging beneath his arms. His breathing came in ragged gasps, his pulse a frantic drumbeat audible in his ears. Should he call someone? The thought felt absurd. An electrician, a paranormal investigator. The lack of any logical framework left him feeling adrift, powerless. The following nights saw a return to avoidance, but the mystery gnawed relentlessly at the edges of his consciousness. Focus fractured. He needed to understand, to find a way into that impossible space. He resumed his probing of walls and floors, tapping, listening for hollow echoes. He meticulously measured the house's exterior dimensions, then the interior. A discrepancy emerged, a section approximately 7 feet deep, unaccounted for internally, yet non-existent externally. The spatial mathematics refused to align. Frustration mounted, his hands shaking as he coiled the tape measure. The sensation of being trapped within a waking nightmare intensified, sharpened by the undeniable reality of the window. One night, Elias decided on documentation. He propped his phone on a stool in the hallway, aimed its lens at the window, and pressed record. He sat beside it, arms folded, enveloped in the expectant silence of the house. His mind drifted, lost work hours, the escalating anxiety, the fleeting thought of seeking professional help. Then, the telltale flicker from the lamp within the hidden room. His chest tightened. Leaning forward, eyes glued to the glass, he watched the silhouette manifest near the foot of the bed, resuming its shuffling of papers. He could hear his own accelerated breathing, but consciously suppressed the urge to speak, determined to capture objective proof, to validate his own sanity. Slowly, deliberately, the figure turned towards him. A jolt of primal fear shot through Elias. He clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms. He forced himself to hold its gaze. The figure drifted closer to the window, though it stopped several feet short of the glass. Again, he saw the strange, distorted reflection in its eyes, like gazing into murky twin pools. An urgent impulse to snatch the phone and run surged, but he held his ground. Then, coinciding with another soft blink of the lamp, the figure dissolved. His heart hammered long after its departure. Once his hands steadied enough, he retrieved the phone and reviewed the footage, trembling fingers fumbling with the controls. The recording showed the mundane hallway, his own tense form in the chair. The lamp in the other room flickered on screen. For a fleeting moment, a darker shape seemed to coalesce within the glass's reflection. Faint, indistinct, more shadow than substance. Then the lamp stabilized, and the anomaly vanished. It bore little resemblance to the visceral presence he had witnessed. The phone had captured only a ghost of a glitch, a trick of light. Frustration prickled his skin. He had no proof. The temptation to shatter the window grew stronger. He envisioned taking a sledgehammer to the glass, breaching the barrier simply to confront whatever lay beyond. Yet, a profound, instinctual certainty held him back, a gut feeling that such an act would unleash something far worse. Fear of disturbing the entity mingled with fear of the unknown consequences, fear of what he might find or become if he crossed that threshold. The thought alone made his palms sweat. Over the last week, Elias has attempted to navigate the currents of normal life. The silhouette continues its appearances, roughly every other night. Sometimes it sorts the papers, other times it stands quiescently by the dresser, seemingly listening. Occasionally, it positions itself beside the bed, facing the window, immobile. Each time it acknowledges his presence with that slight, unnerving tilt of the head. His heart constricts, and always, those eyes, gleaming with reflected light, seem to possess the same shape, the same color as his own. He cannot prove this, yet the intuition persists, chillingly certain. Sleep remains elusive, his dreams haunted by the dimly lit room. He moves through his days in a state of perpetual exhaustion, yet the mystery exerts an irresistible pull. He finds himself drawn back to the hallway, checking the window compulsively, even in the pallid light of early morning, hoping for normalcy, for emptiness. But the scene remains unchanged, a persistent portal to an adjacent impossibility. Last night, he taped a note to the glass. "Who are you?" written in bold marker. Hours later, he found it lying on the hallway floor. The tape was still affixed, but curled at the edges, as if it had simply lost adhesion, or perhaps been removed. The ambiguity was unsettling. Logical avenues are exhausted. Research into the house's history yielded nothing. Built 40 years prior, standard renovations documented, no mention of sealed rooms or architectural anomalies. He feels trapped between the inexplicable and the undeniable. rational thought collides with the impossible reality. A window in his hallway reveals a furnished, lit room containing a silent figure. A room inaccessible by any conventional means. Sometimes he contemplates selling, simply walking away. But it feels like abandoning a puzzle crafted specifically for him. What would happen then? Would another resident see the figure? Or would it vanish with his departure? These questions are relentless nocturnal companions. For now, Elias continues the motions of renovation, skirting the hallway when possible. But the window's presence is a constant weight, a palpable zone of cold. The fine hairs on his arms rise, goose flesh prickling his skin whenever he passes. Moments of desperate courage arise, urging him to break through, to step across the threshold. He never does. He doesn't know which frightens him more, what resides within that room, or what discovering its nature might reveal about himself. He clings to the frayed edges of his composure, but cannot escape the truth. Every time he glances through that glass and meets those reflective eyes, a profound chill shakes him to his core. It feels like staring into a fractured mirror, encountering a version of himself he does not recognize, and the terror it evokes is unlike anything he has ever known. Night draped the lake in a profound hush, a quietude deeper than any found ashore. Under a sickle moon that bled pale light onto the boundless water, our small craft was a solitary island. Only Liam, myself, and the liquid obsidian stretching towards unseen horizons. The engine's thrum was a lone heartbeat against the silence as we carved a path away from the sleeping land. The wake behind us, a quickly healing scar on the glassy surface. Liam navigated, his profile etched against the dim glow of the console, guiding us towards the lake's heart, our sanctuary. Here, we'd cut the engine, surrender to the velvet dark, let the cosmos absorb our terrestrial worries. An annual pilgrimage, phones off, world muted. Yet tonight, the familiar solace felt thin, brittle. The stillness began to hum with an unfamiliar, discordant note. Perhaps an hour drifted by before the intrusion. A sudden eruption of static clawed from the boat's radio, sharp and unexpected. Liam and I froze, glances locking in shared confusion. Untouched, the radio shouldn't have stirred. We were leagues from any broadcast reach, especially in the dead of night. Odd, Liam breathed, leaning to coax the dial. The static only intensified, a blizzard of noise now threaded with phantom whispers, indistinct syllables bubbling as if through water. He wrestled with the knob, but the crackling swelled, the submerged voices growing frantic, yet unintelligible. Not radio chatter, something raw, pleading. Then, abruptly, silence slammed back down, absolute and heavy. We remained fixed, eyes glued to the inert radio, listening to the void it left behind. Liam twisted the knob to off, his face shadowed with disquiet. Interference, maybe, he offered, the words lacking conviction. A storm brewing far off. I offered a nod, equally unconvinced. The heavens were a clear vault of stars, the water placid. No storm announced itself. We lapsed into a taut silence, the engine now dead, adrift on the gentle sway of the current. The lake's customary peace had evaporated, replaced by an unnerving quiescence that raised goose flesh along my arms. It began as a filament of sound, so faint I dismissed it as imagination. A trick of the breeze across the water. A voice. Impossible. Then it returned, clearer this time, undeniably human, etching itself onto the night. You heard that. My voice was a strained thread. Liam's head moved in a slow, deliberate nod, his gaze sweeping the ink-black expanse. I did. We pivoted, straining our eyes against the gloom where the sound originated. Only water met our gaze, vast and shimmering under the moon, the far shore a vague silhouette. No lights, no other vessels, nothing. Stranded boater, Liam ventured, the question hanging hollowly in the air. This far out? Doubt laced my reply. The cry pierced the night again, closer, sharper. A man's voice, ragged with exertion, desperate. Help! Ice traced its way down my spine. Too close. Far too close for the emptiness surrounding us. Liam snatched the heavy flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, painting restless circles on the water. Nothing. Just the endless, undulating surface. Where is it coming from? Liam hissed, his voice taut. We held our breath, listening, the flashlight's glare skittering over the waves. Again the voice, nearer still, yet its source remained stubbornly invisible. It seemed to emanate from the water itself, from the air, echoing strangely, impossibly. A profound wrongness settled deep in my gut. The void out here felt absolute, yet this voice persisted, palpable, right beside us. Help! It shrieked, frantic now. Do we go look? The question felt torn from me, the very idea of approaching that disembodied plea making my skin prickle. Liam hesitated, the flashlight beam momentarily still, then gave a curt nod. Can't ignore it. If someone needs help. The engine coughed back to life, shattering the stillness as we surged towards the phantom cries. The flashlight beam danced ahead, probing the darkness, revealing only water, endlessly repeating itself. Louder now. The voice seemed almost upon us. My heart hammered against my ribs. My knuckles whitened on the boat's cold gunwale. Then, silence crashed down again. Absolute. The voice vanished as if snipped from the air. We cut the engine, drifting, the boat's momentum carrying us slowly forward. The flashlight continued its futile interrogation of the lake's surface. Nothing stirred. No sound but the soft sigh of water against the hull. Gone? I murmured, the word barely audible. Liam shook his head, his jaw set tight. No idea. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the boat rocking gently. We waited, listening with an intensity that strained the ears. But the cry did not return. The lake held its breath, utterly silent, as though the caller had dissolved into the night. The tension between us was a palpable thing. Liam killed the engine again, letting us drift in the heavy quiet, suspended between the dark water and the indifferent stars. Just as the thought of retreat surfaced in my mind, the radio exploded. Not static this time, but a violent electronic shriek, laced with a piercing whine that made my teeth ache. Beneath it, voices erupted, a chaotic torrent, faster, desperate, tumbling over each other in a garbled cacophony. Liam lunged for the controls, fingers scrabbling at the dial, but the onslaught only intensified, as if the radio were possessed, spewing forbidden signals. I strained to decipher anything, leaning closer, but the words were a mangled, frantic rush. Until one voice, impossibly clear, sliced through the pandemonium. A single, chilling Leave. My stomach plummeted. Liam's eyes met mine across the small space, reflecting raw terror. No discussion needed. He slammed the throttle forward. The engine roared. The boat leaped, throwing spray as we raced towards the distant shore. The radio screamed behind us, the static reaching an unbearable pitch. The voices a frantic, swirling vortex of sound. I clamped my hands over my ears. Only when the vague shape of the dock solidified out of the darkness did the radio abruptly die, plunging us back into a sudden, jarring silence. We didn't slow until the hull bumped the familiar wood of the dock. Our hands trembled as we secured the lines. Behind us, the lake lay serene under the fading moon, a placid mirror reflecting a sky innocent of disturbance, as if nothing had transpired. Yet, standing there, gazing back into that immense darkness, the conviction remained, cold and certain. We hadn't been alone out there. Something unseen had shared the water, had watched, had warned. We never ventured onto that lake after dark again. A peculiar hush descends upon woodlands with the fading light, a stillness that suggests the world itself is drawing a sharp, held breath. Not the calm of repose, nor the solace of silence, but a quietude that magnifies solitude, pressing upon you the stark awareness of being utterly alone, perhaps even intruding where you are not welcome. That specific hush draped itself over Elias as he sat beside his fire, mesmerized by the dance of incandescent tongues. Lingering wasn't the plan, but the path had unspooled more slowly than anticipated. And now, as twilight bled entirely from the heavens, he found himself marooned miles from his vehicle, the fire and the churn of his own mind his sole companions. It had presented itself as a sound strategy, a solitary expedition into the wilderness to scour the accumulated grit from a taxing week. He'd chosen a familiar route, one snaking through dense timber, before culminating in a secluded pocket of land beside a murmuring creek. He'd tread this ground before, multiple times, yet never tarried beyond sundown. An indefinable quality clung to the place, something elusive that pricked at his nerves once darkness fell. He dismissed it previously as the standard disquiet of isolation amidst the untamed. Now, firelight throwing his silhouette long and distorted across the clearing, shadows pooling thickly around him, certainty wavered. The fire uttered soft pops and sighs, its glow painting elongated specters across the clearing floor. Trees loomed, colossal and obsidian, their boughs stirring almost imperceptibly on the night air. Tranquility should have reigned, yet that recognizable needle prick of anxiety traced its way up his spine. Elias inhaled deeply, attempting to dislodge the sensation. Nerves, surely. He was deep in the woods, leagues from any sign of human settlement. Only the sun's departure marked a change. The flames offered warmth. The air carried a cool balm. And he was secure. Wasn't he? Then came the sound, a delicate disturbance, a shush shush from just past the clearing's perimeter. Faint, almost swallowed by the fire's intermittent crackle, yet undeniably present, motion within the undergrowth. He went utterly still, his heart kicking against his ribs like a trapped bird, straining to decipher the noise. It possessed a slow, measured quality, suggesting deliberate creeping, a stealthy approach. Snatching the torch from his pack, He sliced the beam through the Stygian gloom toward the trees. Nothing. Only timber, branches swaying with benign grace in the breeze. A ragged exhalation escaped him, pulse still hammering. An animal, most likely. A deer, perhaps, or a raccoon drawn by curiosity. Yet the conviction that he was no longer the sole occupant of this space refused to dissipate. He rose, the torch trembling faintly in his grip as he swept its beam along the clearing's edge. The rustling had ceased, but the unease persisted, settling upon him like a sodden shroud. The impulse to dismantle camp and flee screamed within him, yet the prospect of navigating the trail back in utter blackness somehow felt more menacing than remaining. So he sank back down by the fire, wrestling with his own mind, forcing affirmations of normalcy. The sound was gone. The night had reclaimed its silence. Paranoia was surely the culprit. But even as he sought the fire's tangible comfort, the unshakable perception of being observed lingered, cold and insistent. And then, flickering at the periphery of his vision, a shape, standing just where the firelight surrendered to shadow, partially obscured by the sentinel trees. Elias's heart vaulted into his throat. He whipped the torch towards it, but by the time the light pierced the tree line, the space was vacant. He surged to his feet again, the torch beam now visibly quivering as he raked it across the forest wall. "Hello." His voice erupted, louder than intended, sharp in the stillness. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered, profound and heavy, broken only by the soft percussion of the fire. He remained standing, heart galloping, poised for any reply, any movement. But the figure did not rematerialize. The trees stood motionless. The shadows yielded nothing. He knew. He had seen something. The silhouette, the subtle shift, too substantial for a mere phantasm of light and shadow. Yet now, bathed in the unsteady, flickering radiance of the campfire, doubt began its insidious creep. Perhaps it was imagination, conjuring terrors from the dark. Perhaps the isolation was fraying his senses, birthing specters where none existed. But a deeper instinct, cold and certain, refuted the notion. Something, or someone, had been there, at the clearing's edge, watching. He resumed his seat by the dwindling flames, every nerve stretched taut. Each nocturnal sound amplified, seeming unnervingly close. The fire's crackle acquired an echoing quality. The wind sighing through the leaves sounded like a whispered threat. A knot of dread tightened in his gut, his thoughts racing, replaying the sighting. He resolved to wait only a short while longer, allowing the fire to subside further. Then he would gather his belongings and make for the car. Even stumbling through the darkened woods seemed preferable to sitting here, a stationary target in this unsettling clearing, waiting for the unknown to unfold. Before he could act, the rustling recommenced, louder this time, emanating from the precise location where the figure had stood. He sprang upright, torch already aimed, beam stabbing towards the source. "Who's there?" he demanded, striving for a firmness his voice lacked. Again, only silence responded. But he saw it, the shape, nearer now, positioned just beyond the furthest reach of the firelight. Tall, unnervingly so, with attenuated limbs, and a form cloaked in indistinct darkness. No features were discernible, yet he felt its gaze fixed upon him, an unseen pressure emanating from the shadows. His breath hitched. He stood transfixed, rooted to the spot. It offered no movement, no sound, simply stood, observing. Then, as abruptly as it had manifested, it retracted, melting back between the trees, vanishing into the profound blackness without a whisper. Elias didn't hesitate this time. He seized his backpack, slinging it onto his shoulder as he hastily smothered the embers with the dregs of his water. His hands shook violently, heart pounding a frantic rhythm as he scooped up his few possessions and plunged towards the trail's entrance. He risked no backward glance. He had no desire to confirm if the Watcher still lingered in the darkness. His entire being focused on a single imperative: escaping these woods with all possible speed. The path was a constricted, twisting ribbon. Trees pressed close on either side as he propelled himself forward, legs pumping furiously. His torch sputtered, its batteries failing, casting wild, erratic splashes of light into the oppressive density of the forest. Every twig snap, every leaf skitter sent jolts of adrenaline through him, his imagination painting the figure gliding silently in his wake. He pushed onward without pause, without rest, until the faint, distant luminescence of his car's reflectors glimmered through the trees. A wave of immense relief crashed over him as he burst from the woods, stumbling onto the gravel, legs quivering from exertion and terror. He hurled his pack onto the rear seat, scrambled behind the wheel, and tore out of the deserted parking area, eyes fixed firmly ahead. What Elias encountered in the woods that night remains an enigma. Whether human, animal, or something altogether different, he cannot say. But one truth settled deep within him: he would never revisit that trail. Some places, he now understood, demand to be left undisturbed, and sometimes the profound quiet of the forest is not empty at all. That first dawn, the sight froze Elias in the threshold of his own office. Etched onto the pristine white expanse of his new board were words not his own. He blinked, a slow cadence against the sudden constriction, tightening his ribs. The script itself seemed agitated, a frantic scrawl leaning hard to the right, utterly alien. A primal urge to retreat pulsed through him. He swallowed against a sudden dryness. His phone felt heavy in his pocket, a lifeline ungrasped. Some instinct, perhaps morbid curiosity, stayed his hand. He would investigate this intrusion himself. He couldn't fathom then how this single, bizarre discovery would unravel into a tapestry of sleepless vigils and days steeped in quiet dread. Now, seated here amidst the familiar clutter of his workspace, he attempts to impose order on the chaos blooming within. His heart clenches with every involuntary glance towards that stark white rectangle. With nowhere else to pivot, he commits the unfolding strangeness to paper. Weeks prior, he'd mounted the thing, a standard, sizable magnetic whiteboard, envisioning it as a canvas for brainstorms, a ledger for tasks. It occupied the far wall behind his desk, positioned at eye level, flanked by a neat little ledge, cradling a pair of dry erase markers. A small surge of satisfaction had accompanied the act, a rare nod towards organizational discipline from someone not naturally inclined towards tidiness. It felt like progress. Then came Monday. Elias unlocked the office, coffee steaming in hand. The comforting ritual shattered almost instantly. The computer screen was dark, expected. His chair remained tucked beneath the desk, undisturbed. But the whiteboard, oh, the whiteboard blazed with lines of text, not as sprawling, looping letters, but something compact, sharp-edged. He drifted closer, drawn by a reluctant gravity. The initial lines spoke of shadowed recesses and dim passageways. Below it, mention of tenebrous symbols. An attempt to clear his throat produced only a rasp. No hint of forced entry, the lock secure as he'd left it. Shaking his head, a gesture of denial, he resolved to erase the anomaly. He seized the felt eraser, scrubbing with deliberate pressure until the surface gleamed vacant once more, rubbing thrice over for good measure, banishing phantom traces. He retreated to the break room, seeking refuge in caffeine and ambient chatter. Colleagues offered brief greetings. He offered none of the morning's peculiarity in return. Too strange. Better to observe, to see if the phenomenon repeated. Upon his return, the board remained blessedly blank. A measure of calm returned. He booted his machine, immersed himself in the day's demands. Meetings, tasks, the rhythm of normalcy reasserted itself. Locking up near 6, the whiteboard stared back, empty. Tuesday dawned earlier. Flipping the switch, bathing the room in fluorescent light, his gaze snapped instantly to the wall. Attention seized his jaw as he approached. The writing had returned, transformed. Larger characters now, proclaiming cryptic warnings of ancient incantations, of portals best left sealed. The constriction in his chest returned, tighter this time. His fingertips brushed the surface. The ink felt disconcertingly fresh. Silence pressed in. He scanned the empty corridor beyond his door. Quiet. The floor dormant. His phone emerged, capturing several images. Proof, should proof be needed. Then, the ritualistic erasure, the marker yielding easily, leaving no ghost behind. If it happened again, he decided security would be involved. The day unfolded without further incident. Lunch consumed at his desk, his attention perpetually snagged by the blank white square. It remained immaculate. Yet, an unease settled deep within him. Every shuffle in the hallway, every passing footstep, became a potential intrusion, spinning him in his chair. He began leaving the overhead lights burning during his brief absences, abandoning his usual energy-saving habit for the dubious comfort of unwavering illumination. The knot in his stomach tightened. Focus fractured, thoughts drifting relentlessly back to the board. Wednesday evening found him working late, a deadline looming. Around 9, a faint, dry, scratching sound whispered from behind him, like a stylus on a resistant surface. Elias froze, every sinew taut. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. The whiteboard lay partially obscured in the room's corner, beyond the main reach of his desk lamp. He leaned, squinting into the dimness. Vague forms materialized on the surface, faint lines coalescing. A dull throb started in his temples. He flicked the overhead switch. There it was, the writing. But this time, he was witnessing its birth. Stroke by spectral stroke, letters formed as if guided by an unseen hand wielding an invisible marker. Yet, the actual marker rested innocently on its ledge, even as its phantom twin inscribed its message. Its tip skittered across the board with faint, insistent squeaks. Elias's legs trembled. His arms felt leaden. He surged forward, reaching for the marker on the ledge. It skittered away from his grasp, continuing its spectral inscription. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat threatening oblivion. The words tumbled out, hidden catacombs, profane assemblies, forbidden lore. A chaotic litany, a strangled cry escaped him as he swiped wildly at the writing implement. It clattered to the floor, silencing the squeaks. The letters ceased mid-formation. He stood, breath ragged, hands shaking uncontrollably, leaning heavily against his desk for support. The text ended abruptly, a sentence fractured. No movement on the floor. The marker lay inert. He snatched the eraser, wiped the board clean, tossed the offending marker into the waste bin, grabbed his bag and fled, leaving his computer humming in the abandoned office. Home. He needed air, distance. Sleep offered no sanctuary that night. The scene replayed endlessly. The disembodied scratching, the self-propelling marker. He found himself checking a bedroom door, the unease of the office bleeding into the presumed safety of his apartment miles away. His phone lay dormant on the nightstand. The story felt too fantastical, too unhinged to share. Who would believe it? A friend, a priest. The words died before forming. He arrived late the following morning, a palpable weight settling in his gut as he pushed open the office door. New script defiled the whiteboard. Thicker lines this time, bolder pronouncements concerning dark altars and communion with voices from beyond. A disturbing organization had crept in. The phrases were spaced, aligned, hinting at a deliberate pattern. Elias dragged a hand across his face, finding it slick with sweat. He called building security. A tall, impassive man named Gian arrived, notepad in hand. Elias explained the unauthorized entries, displayed the phone's photographic evidence. Together, they reviewed the hallway security footage. Nothing. No one entering or leaving during the relevant times. The corridor remained empty on the timestamp of his late-night departure. His own passcode had been used, but only by him. Gian offered a baffled shrug, promising to keep an extra eye out. That night, Elias remained again, but bathed the office in defiant light. Phone clutched, recording app poised. As the hours bled towards midnight, weariness pulling at his eyelids, the familiar scratch returned. He spun, phone aimed. The marker danced across the board, autonomous, leaving trails of ink. His phone captured the movement, yet the resulting letters appeared strangely blurred on screen. A distinct chill permeated the air near the board. Goose flesh prickled his arms. He edged closer, the cold intensifying on the back of his neck. He watched new text bloom, large, stark letters. I am he. His stomach lurched. The phone nearly slipped from his grasp. The marker paused beneath the declaration, expectant. Then, more words materialized. I will speak. Disbelief warred with terror. Reaching out, his fingertips brushed the marker. A faint static buzz, an almost imperceptible current, tingled against his skin. He snatched his hand back, rubbing his fingers together. The marker dropped, clattering onto the ledge. He lunged for the eraser, scrubbing with a force that made his arm ache, leaving the board polished and white before backing away. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then held steady. Heart galloping, he decided instantly. Leave. Now. His footsteps echoed unnervingly down the deserted corridor. The subsequent days were a blur of forced normalcy, layered over profound exhaustion and tension. Seated at his desk, he found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder. Each morning brought fresh script, sometimes fragmented repetitions. Ritual, chamber, summon, whisper, abyss. Other times, entire paragraphs emerged, dense with descriptions of hidden geographies and cryptic sigils. Erasing felt increasingly futile, yet the alternative, letting colleagues witness the madness, was unthinkable. At night, the scratching became a familiar torment. He experimented with dimmer desk lighting, hoping to observe without casting revealing shadows. His body remained coiled, a knot of tension settling in his lower back, his shoulders rigid, his eyes burned from staring, waiting. Then the marker would stir, and he'd watch, transfixed, as the letters spooled out. The messages grew more pointed, more personal. Listen. Obey. Respond. He recoiled from their implications, desperate not to understand, yet unable to fully ignore the insistent pull. One afternoon, resolve hardened. He would remove the source. He attacked the 4 screws holding the whiteboard to the wall, his hands clumsy with tremor. Sweat beaded on his brow, wiped away with a shirt sleeve. Once freed, he hauled the cumbersome board down the hall to the storage room, burying it behind a stack of forgotten boxes. Returning to his office, a fleeting sense of triumph washed over him. Perhaps it was finished. He sank into his chair, staring at the blank patch of wall, rubbing the dampness from his palms onto his trousers. The next morning shattered the illusion. Pinned crudely to the wall where the whiteboard had been was a rectangle of white cardboard, adorned with the same sharp, slanted script. A quick check of the hallway revealed only emptiness. He touched the cardboard. It felt unnaturally cold, as if recently retrieved from a deep freeze. The message was chillingly direct. You can't hide. Return. Continue. Nausea surged. He fled to the restroom, splashing cold water on his face, leaning over the basin, gulping air. When he returned, the cardboard was gone. Phone in hand, heart pounding a frantic rhythm, he strode to the storage room. The whiteboard stood upright against the far wall, stark white against the clutter, covered in fresh, bold letters. You will see. He tugged at his hair, fighting for composure. His mouth was dust. The acrid taste of bile rose in his throat. He tried to work back in his office, but the air felt thick, suffocating. His thoughts circled endlessly around the entity's intentions. He anchored himself to physical sensations, the sweat on his palms, the frantic pulse in his wrist, the parched terrain of his mouth. He felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. He left early, pacing his apartment restlessly. Appetite vanished. Television offered no distraction. The situation escalated over the following week. The messages grew longer, more coherent, morphing into disturbing instructions for some arcane ritual. Steps, implements, specific nocturnal hours were detailed. He refused complicity, erasing them almost unread, yet key phrases snagged in his memory. References to a concealed locale, a recurring sigil like a warped asymmetric star. Each encounter left his skin crawling, his thoughts momentarily blanking out. He tried relocating his workspace to another corner, laptop perched precariously on a filing cabinet. It made no difference. The nocturnal scratching persisted, a disembodied soundtrack to his dread. Ignoring it only seemed to amplify the sound. Stepping into the hallway brought silence, but returning to his desk summoned the squeaking anew. Checking the board always revealed fresh inscriptions. sleep became a forgotten luxury. His reflection showed sunken eyes ringed with exhaustion. His hands trembled persistently. The simple act of drinking water was fraught with the suspense of anticipating that grating slide of marker on board. He'd stand watching the lines form, paralyzed, capable only of the ritual erasure that followed. One night, close to 11, an abrupt chill dropped the room's temperature. His breath plumed faintly. The overhead lights stuttered. His desk lamp dimmed ominously. Then, the sound. This time, Elias walked deliberately towards the board, letting the unseen scribe work unimpeded. He watched each word appear. "Speak to me." He swallowed, the sound loud in the silence. His face flushed hot, forehead damp. His pulse hammered a deafening beat. He reached out, palm flat against the board. A low vibration hummed beneath his touch. Leaning closer, hands still pressed to the surface, he watched the marker spell another phrase. "I have waited." His mouth opened, but sound refused to form. The tightness in his chest became a vice. The marker detached from its invisible holder, hovering momentarily before the board. It wrote, "Answer." Elias pressed harder, a desperate, futile attempt to push back against the intangible force. The vibration intensified for a heartbeat, then ceased. The marker fell. He gasped, stumbling back. He stared at the final word for a long minute before seizing the eraser and obliterating the exchange. He knew with chilling certainty this was far from over. Stopping it felt impossible. How does one combat an invisible hand, a persistent voice from nowhere? Yet, he remains. Night after night, Elias occupies the illuminated island of his office, waiting for the marker's inevitable stir. He hears the faint squeaks evolve into confident strokes. He sees the words about hidden realms, ancient rites, and dark geographies he dare not name. His hands shake, his heart pounds a frantic tattoo against his ribs, but he endures. For now, endurance is all he possesses. He sits, starkly awake, stomach clenching with every renewed scrape of felt on laminate. The messages gain clarity, confidence, almost intimacy. The letters loom larger, the demands more direct, focusing squarely on him, urging action. He hasn't yielded, not yet, but feels the pressure mounting, an insidious erosion of will. His head aches perpetually. His eyes sting from the constant vigilance. When he finally escapes into the pre-dawn gloom, the phantom squeaking echoes in his ears. Sleep, when it comes at home, is shallow, haunted, his phone a useless talisman clutched in his hand as he waits for morning and the cycle's renewal. This is his reality now. The next step remains shrouded. All Elias knows is the relentless dawn bringing fresh words, fresh terror. He doesn't know if there's an end, a cessation, but he is here, confronting the stark white surface, regardless of the crawling revulsion, the frantic pulse. He takes ragged breaths and wipes away the words, even as they seem to sear themselves onto his consciousness. He clings to this small act of defiance, this illusion of control. He needs to discover if there is a boundary, a limit to this intrusion. He hasn't found it. The words keep coming. The board remains. There is no hiding. He is tethered to this office, these walls, alone with the insistent presence, striving to speak through the silence.